Thanks for joining us for this look at some of the best stories from KPBS News this week. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Coming up, use of force lawsuits in National City. KPBS looks at recent cases that led to major settlements to avoid trial. San Diego wants to raise parking fees for some high-demand areas. We will explain the dynamic pricing plan. And after more than a decade of disputes, an agreement is reached over how Southern California manages its water. We start with the response to last week's ICE raid in South Park that drew national attention. Local elected leaders and community leaders made their voices heard. We have two stories, starting with Gustavo Solis on the pushback by members of Congress.
Let him go!
More than 20 ICE agents conducted a workplace immigration raid in South Park Friday afternoon. They wore body armor, carried large rifles, and even used flashbang grenades to clear a crowd of protesters. Dozens of people chanted as agents arrested 4 restaurant workers. ICE out! ICE out! On Monday, San Diego's Democratic congressional representatives called the raid aggressive, reckless, and counterproductive. Congressman Juan Vargas says that the militarized response has traumatized the community.
Why were ICE agents armed to the teeth as if they were entering a war zone, storming restaurants? Why were ICE agents aggressively shoving people against the walls and handcuffing every worker in sight?
Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs pointed out that none of the 4 people arrested have violent criminal records.
This isn't about going after criminals. They're going after people who are trying to do the right thing and people who are contributing to our economy.
Both Vargas and Jacobs acknowledged that, as members of the minority party in Washington, D.C., their legislative options are limited. But they still want to push back on President Trump's mass deportation campaign. Vargas wants to put more pressure on federal judges who signed off on warrants like the one used to justify Friday's raid.
And I hate to say this because I hate going after federal judges because they have very difficult work. I know that, and I respect them. But this was a mistake on their part, a terrible mistake. They allowed it to happen.
The federal court did not respond to a request for comment. Jacobs noted that Friday's immigration raid was not an isolated incident. She criticized a similar workplace raid near El Cajon and ICE's tactic of arresting people in immigration court. She says communities can make a big difference if people speak out.
All of this public pressure, actually really works, right? We saw them change their policies on the student visa revocations in the first Trump administration on separations at the border because of public pressure.
Congressman Scott Peters warned that these types of raids could be just the beginning. That's because of the big, beautiful bill that Congress recently approved, and it has more than $100 billion for immigration enforcement.
This terrible, terrible waste of resources, the big, beautiful bill that they passed, has $100 billion added to do stuff like this.
He also criticized the Trump administration for saying that they're prioritizing violent criminals, but arresting innocent people.
It's coming from inside our own government. This is our government terrorizing our own communities. And that is absolutely upside down, wrong-headed.
An ICE spokesperson did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
Last week's ICE raid targeting restaurant workers also has the attention of union leaders. They call it a cruel attack that terrorizes the community. Alexander Nguyen has that part of the story and details on the warrant that led to the raid.
Stop deporting workers!
Labor leaders held a rally today in front of the federal courthouse downtown to condemn the raid at Buena Forqueta last week.
And a wave of terror has been unleashed by this administration.
They say what happened in South Park is reminiscent of a dictatorship. Lorena Gonzalez, president of the California Federation of Labor Unions, says the raid was a scare tactic meant to intimidate workers.
They told us it was about criminals and making America safer. Now, those of us who have worked in the immigrant community for years knew that was bullshit.
Buena Forqueta posted a note on its door saying all locations in San Diego and Orange counties are closed Monday and Tuesday. People have been leaving flowers here in support of the workers. In the warrant released yesterday, it says about 50% of the workers use fake documents to obtain work. Labor leaders say today that's no reason for the show of force Friday.
They handcuffed workers, they fired explosives near families, and they've left workers and families trembling. This is what happens when politicians treat human beings as if they're targets.
According to the warrant, Homeland Security received the initial tip in November 2020 about workers using fraudulent green cards. A follow-up tip came at the end of January this year. A DHS investigation in February showed that 19 workers submitted fraudulent green cards. That led to the raid Friday, resulting in the arrest of 4 workers.
They sent masked, armed troops into a neighborhood with high-grade military weapons for fake papers. That is absolute and utter bullshit.
San Diego Council member Sean-Elo Rivera had called ICE agents terrorists. In the raid, state-sponsored terrorism on his Instagram account. That grabbed the attention of Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. Elo Rivera was unapologetic.
Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, just like any bully, they don't like to be called out. And so when they get called out, they try to intimidate again. I called him a fascist because he is a fascist.
Buenaventura says it is still reviewing the allegations stated in the warrant. Alexander Nguyen, KPBS News.
A warning now for this next story because it includes violent images. In the last 4 years, National City has paid to settle 3 separate civil rights lawsuits brought by the families of people who died after police officers confronted them. Corey Suzuki says those settlements have reignited questions about how police respond to people in mental health crises. He also shows us how the city's approach is changing.
The cemetery is quiet. It's a tiny plot of land tucked away behind the mortuary in southeast San Diego. On spring evenings, the sun spills across the grass. Roberto Umana comes every week to change the flowers. He places them in a vase that he spray-painted bright gold. He wanted his older brother's gravestone to have some color.
He liked very bright colors when it came to his style, his fashion, especially shoes. So, I don't know, I think it just stands out, really. That's kind of why I did it.
As Roberto tells it, his brother Brian was a pretty quiet person. He liked comedy and collecting sneakers. Like any younger sibling, Roberto looked up to him.
I remember he got his ears pierced. I wanted to get my ears pierced. Stuff like that. He was just my big brother. I wanted to follow him with whatever he was doing.
Brian was confronted by National City police officers in the early morning hours of October 2021. Roberto says Brian was in the middle of a mental health crisis, triggered by their father's death 8 years earlier. Body camera footage and court records show the encounter began when police dispatchers received a call about a person breaking into a storage facility. County investigators say the caller reported that the person was holding a blade and left on foot.
Where's the knife at?
3 officers responded, body cameras rolling. They found Brian pacing along the sidewalk in the rain, holding a machete in his right hand. In their video, you can see that he's barefoot. The cuffs of his brown pants look like they're soaked with water. They yell at him to drop the machete and threaten to release a police dog. Brian starts walking away from them up the sidewalk. One of the officers fires a taser, and Brian flinches. 2 officers move in close. Brian turns towards them and raises the machete. 2 officers, Evan Davis and Michael Sportelli, open fire. Davis with a handgun, Sportelli with a high-powered AR-15 rifle. They hit Brian 8 times, according to the DA's office. In the video, Brian freezes and topples from the sidewalk into the street. It was the 3rd time in 4 years that National City Police confronted someone in crisis, and that encounter turned fatal. In 2018, a black man named Earl McNeil stopped breathing in custody after officers arrested him and used a full-body restraint device and a mesh face covering to bind his arms and legs.
Get on the ground!
In 2019, a white man named Tony Wilson died after officers pressed him against the ground and tased him repeatedly. County investigators eventually declined to bring criminal charges against the officers who shot Brian, but Roberto still had questions. He felt like there had been clear signs that Brian was mentally unwell. His bare feet, the time, 4 a.m., the fact that he was pacing back and forth.
It's kind of common sense that he was going through a mental health crisis and the officers didn't really de-escalate whatsoever.
A year after the shooting, Roberto filed a civil rights lawsuit in federal court, arguing that officers failed to de-escalate the situation and used excessive force. Separately, the families of Tony Wilson and Earl McNeil filed their own lawsuits. The cases stretched on for years, but eventually, in all 3, National City officials decided to pay to resolve them instead of allowing them to go before a jury. This past February, city officials paid Roberto and his family $1 million to resolve their case.
Every officer-involved shooting is traumatic for all involved.
City officials said the settlement didn't mean the city did anything wrong. Here's City Attorney Barry Schultz speaking at a city council meeting in February.
The City of National City and the police department agree that the officers' actions were justified during this critical incident.
But for some experts, these settlements do raise new questions about what National City has learned from these cases. Joanna Schwartz is a professor of law at UCLA and a national expert on police misconduct litigation. She says the city should be closely examining the information that emerged in court, combing through depositions and documents.
If there was an airplane crash and 3 people died, you would be opening up that black box to try to figure out what happened and what went wrong and whether there is any shift, any change that could be made to prevent it from happening again.
The settlement has changed some things for Roberto. The cemetery where Brian is buried used to be a place of anger and worry. But when he visited this past April, Roberto said he felt calm.
I'm very relaxed when I come here now. Very at peace.
Still, he does worry that the city may just plan to move on from his case and the cases of the other families. Tomorrow, we'll look at what National City is doing to change their policies when it comes to responding to people in crisis. In National City, Corey Suzuki, KPBS News. In 2018, National City police officers arrested a black man named Earl McNeil. They used a full-body restraint device and a mesh face covering to bind his arms and legs. McNeil had a heart attack in custody. A year later, in 2019, officers held a white man named Tony Wilson against the ground and tased him repeatedly. He stopped breathing. And in 2021, officers confronted a Latino man named Brian Umana. He was walking barefoot in the rain, holding a machete. The officers tased and shot him 8 times. In all 3 cases, the families of these men say they were experiencing mental health crises. Independently, each of the families sued the city, accusing officers of using excessive force. In all 3 cases, National City leaders decided to pay to settle the lawsuits instead of allowing them to go to trial. This past February, they approved the final settlement, $1 million for Umana's family.
I want there to be some transparency and accountability.
Sophia Bendari is the daughter of Wilson, the man who was held down and tased. She says it felt like the police used her father's mental illness and the fact that he had used drugs and had been in and out of jail to try and paint his life as less important.
They literally talked about my dad like he was a piece of garbage. And it's like, he was a human being, you know?
Joanna Schwartz is a professor of law at UCLA and a national expert on police misconduct litigation. She says lawsuits like these are opportunities for cities to examine what might have gone wrong and what changes they could make to prevent future fatal encounters.
There may have been wrongdoing by police. There may not have been wrongdoing by police, but you're never going to know the answer to that question unless you actually look at the information in that lawsuit and try to understand what went wrong.
But often, Schwartz says that kind of reflection doesn't happen.
What I have found is that often law enforcement agencies don't even do that first step of trying to learn from the lawsuits that have been brought against them.
In the 7 years since that first in-custody death, elected officials in National City have made some changes.
Who killed Earl McNeil?
Under pressure from the public, the city council pushed to keep police officers from being the first to respond to people in mental health crises.
Drop the machete now!
Marcus Bush is the vice mayor of National City.
The police were considering before, but it wasn't as big a priority. So these incidences, unfortunately, push it to priority, push it at the forefront.
The city already had a program called the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team, or PERT, county mental health workers who respond alongside officers. But the county has struggled to fully staff the program, and their teams are not always available. In June 2021, the city council voted to partner with the county to deploy a new program, the Mobile Crisis Response Teams, or MCRTs. The police chief at the time, Jose Tellez, said it was an important step.
Police responders that not having to answer these calls or being the first ones to respond is it's a good thing.
MCRT teams are also made up of licensed clinicians, but they do not include any armed officers. They're also dispatched primarily through the 988 crisis number instead of 911 and are available 24/7. National City was one of the first cities in the county to sign up.
When I look at year over year, we're doubling our call volume every year.
Bree Lane is a program administrator with Telecare, the company that runs the MCRT program for most of San Diego County. She says 4 years in, they're seeing positive signs.
People are feeling more comfortable to access MCRT. It means law enforcement's accessing us more for people they're coming in contact with.
In 2023, the city also launched a small team of caseworkers to respond to homelessness-related calls. They do coordinate closely with police, but their team also does not include armed officers. But when it comes to these civil rights lawsuits, it's unclear what the city has learned from them. The police department declined multiple requests for interviews and refused to say what lessons they're learning from these cases, or whether they have made any changes to their policies.
What could we do better? No, we have not had that conversation. I think we should.
Bush, the vice mayor, says the police department has made strides when it comes to building trust, but he acknowledges that the city council needs to more openly discuss these cases.
I think where we leave it is, this incident, this was really bad. This is, let's make sure this doesn't happen again, and let's move on. But we don't take enough proactive steps to, okay, what are we making sure to help to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Bush says he hopes to change that pattern by having more discussions on the council and expanding the role of the city's Citizen Oversight Board. Bandari, Wilson's daughter, is hopeful about some of those changes.
Admitting you have a problem is part of a resolution, and I think that's huge. It really, really is,
Above all, though, Bandari wants to remind city officials that people in crisis are just as human and deserve to be treated with just as much dignity. In National City, Corey Suzuki, KPBS News.
Corey Suzuki covers the South Bay for KPBS. He also covers issues from Imperial County. You can find more of his content at kpbs.org and on the KPBS YouTube page. The district attorney has charged a San Diego police officer with embezzling thousands of dollars to buy personal items. KPBS investigative reporter Scott Rodd says the officer allegedly stole from the city's school crosswalk patrol program.
Investigators served Officer Curtis Dole with search warrants last year. They were looking for a range of items they believed he illegally bought using a department bank account. And they found plenty. AirPods, nutritional supplements, holsters, and electronics. Even the pair of Costco pants Dole was wearing that day. Dole served as director of SDPD's School Safety Patrol. The program trains young students to patrol crosswalks. His alleged actions came to light during a court hearing last month.
Man, I was blown away.
Tasha Williamson is a local advocate for police accountability and attended the hearing. Some funding for the Crosswalk Patrol program comes from the city, and some comes from parents.
Yeah, I think it erodes trust. The detective that was on the stand said it best, that parents did not put their kids in this program or these programs to then have money embezzled.
Dole has pleaded not guilty to a felony charge. He remains a paid employee of the police department. SDPD has not publicly addressed the criminal case against Dole. Williamson criticized this lack of transparency with parents and the public.
Communication has to be open, and you have to dialogue even in the difficult times so that they know, yes, this happened, but these are the steps that we're going to take.
An SDPD spokesperson declined to answer specific questions from KPBS about the case. Under state law, Dole would permanently lose his badge if convicted of a felony. His arraignment is set for later this month. Scott Rodd, KPBS News.
Voting started in the South Bay this week in the runoff election for San Diego County's District 1 supervisor. KPBS has extensive coverage on the candidates, the issues at the KPBS Voter Hub. The district includes San Ysidro, Chula Vista, National City, and other neighborhoods in San Diego. KPBS South Bay reporter Corey Suzuki recently interviewed both candidates about their campaigns. And you can find the link on the KPBS Voter Hub on our homepage at kpbs.org. And we will have more coverage leading up to Election Day on July 1st. You could soon have to pay a little more to park in San Diego. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says the price you pay at meters could fluctuate based on demand.
Studies show if parking meters are too cheap, they don't really do their job of managing parking demand and increasing turnover. If they're too expensive, they might sit empty. That's why the San Diego City Council approved shifting to dynamic pricing. Take the parking meters near Petco Park. Those premium parking spots will get more expensive during Padres games, when private lots and garages can easily charge $50 or more. Councilmember Raul Campillo said it's common sense efficiency.
I know that we're using data to make the right determination on this. It's been collected in the study, and these will be analyzed at least quarterly to make sure that data is driving our decision about the pricing.
The council also ended a prohibition on charging for parking on Sundays and revamped the rules around creating residential parking permit zones. Councilmember Stephen Whitburn said he asked for those changes to help residents in dense, mixed-use neighborhoods who don't have off-street parking.
What this means is that residents who live in existing parking meter zones will be able to get a permit that will allow them to continue to park at the meters without charge on Sundays.
In the coming weeks, the council will also vote on whether to charge for parking in Balboa Park, at least in the most high-demand lots. That's been met with resistance from the park's museums and cultural institutions, who fear it will discourage people from visiting the park. Councilmember Sean Elo Rivera disagreed.
I think this is a classic example of San Diego needing to be more confident in itself. People are going to go to Balboa Park. It's a beautiful park with incredible museums and resources. We can figure this out.
At Elo Rivera's insistence, the mayor's office agreed to study a program that would offer discounts to city residents who park in Balboa Park lots. The city still has to update signage and do more study and outreach before changing parking meter rates and enforcement hours. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
The San Diego City Council is scheduled to cast its final vote next week on the proposed city budget. KPBS education reporter Katie Anastas says council members want to find a way to keep libraries open on Mondays.
Mayor Todd Gloria's budget proposal would close all 37 library branches on Sundays and Mondays, saving the city more than $8 million. Community members and advocates have argued that across-the-board cuts aren't fair to communities that need library resources the most.
People have really turned out and said, this is unacceptable. We understand that budgeting is hard, but we also have a set of priorities that we want to budget for. And we do that as individual families. We do that in our communities, and we expect our city to do the same thing. You know, there are priorities that we have, and we're not willing to give those up.
Next, San Diego City Council members will discuss their budget priorities. 8 out of 9 have said they want to see library hours restored, especially on Mondays. A new report from the city's independent budget analyst outlines the cost and staffing needs for Monday hours at 14 of the 37 branches, including the 10 libraries that offer after-school homework help. Monday hours would cost about $3 million for the full day and $2 million for a half day. 8 members also want to avoid cutting recreation center hours. That could cost between $300,000 and about $3 million, depending on the number of centers included.
The young people in these communities often do not have another option.
Councilmember Sean Elo Rivera says one way to pay for restored hours is moving up the start date for paid parking at Balboa Park. Gloria's budget suggests charging for parking starting January 1st. Elo Rivera and other council members say starting by Labor Day could bring in another $5.5 million. He says the city could also consider charging non-residents to park at the zoo.
We absolutely have the capacity and the ability to accelerate making those folks pay. Why would we not do that? And the benefit that comes from that could be reopening libraries, never shutting down libraries, never shutting down rec centers, never shutting down parks.
The city council will discuss the report on Friday. They'll make modifications and adopt a final budget on Tuesday. Katie Anastas, KPBS News.
A 15-year water war is over at last. Southern California's 2 largest water agencies have reached an agreement. John Carroll says the landmark settlement signals a new era of water sustainability in the region.
This is a moment some thought would never come. The signing of agreements signaling the end of litigation between the San Diego County Water Authority and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, litigation that began in 2010.
And at times, I know it was seemingly an unbridgeable divide.
Nick Serrano chairs the San Diego County Water Authority Board. He described the legal battles over the last 15 years in stark terms.
Ones that have defined a generation of water policy, strained relationships, cost ratepayers, and too often diverted our collective focus and energy away from what I believe matters most, the people we serve.
The litigation between the 2 agencies centered around the price the Water Authority pays to Los Angeles-based Metropolitan for the exchange of water. Beginning in 2010, the authority repeatedly challenged Metropolitan's price. Both sides won legal battles along the way. Now, the Water Authority will pay a fixed price for Metropolitan water, adjusted annually for inflation. The price will no longer be tied to Metropolitan's rates, a primary factor in the disputes. Now, the authority can offer water deliveries to other water agencies that get their water from Metropolitan.
It was one of my goals as chair to put an end to this strife, very expensive strife that added up to $40 million when you combine what both agencies spent.
So it's better for us to see our shared challenges and be able to work together in partnership because we have the same interest in mind.
Serrano says the two agencies started talking in earnest about ending the litigation about a year ago. He says a new era of cooperation is now beginning, and he says ratepayers will be the eventual winners.
Water Authority has an abundance of water supplies that aren't being used by our residents, but is coming at a cost to our ratepayers. This opens the door, unlocks the potential for us to be able to move that water to other jurisdictions that may need it.
So this idea of exchanging water within our system between those agencies that have more than they need and those that may use that supply is a way of squeezing out every drop of efficiency that our investments are creating, so that there's some rate relief in San Diego by being able to sell that water to a broader public.
Moving forward, there is a bigger picture to consider here. Leadership from both agencies say that this landmark settlement should be used as a template of cooperation for other agencies across the Southwest and indeed the entire country. John Carroll, KPBS News.
We hope that you enjoyed this look at KPBS News this week. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Thank you for joining us.